And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and Michael Lahans Calderon. Heather, what do we have today? Any news?
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Let's get into it. The certification of the presidency, the Speaker of the House, Elon Musk. I go on?
This is the Republican takeover that we have all been dreading, and it is actually happening. It is starting already. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Michael.
Happy New Year.
It's a Happy New Year notwithstanding. That's what I say to people. Happy New Year notwithstanding
or
everything
all
else.
Considering.
All considered
is one I do.
Yes. So what about the 119th Congress, particularly the Senate?
This coming Monday, in 2 days, is January 6th.
Yes.
What happens on January 6th, which is 30 days after the election, is the certification of the presidency, which will be done by Vice President Kamala Harris. What is the symbolism
in
of
contrast?
This?
Well, this is the first certification since the certification of Biden, Joe Biden. You remember what happened on that day?
It went completely smoothly.
January 6th.
Yeah.
And, the Constitution and the founders and everybody who cares about this country fundamentally depends on a smooth and peaceful transition of power. And what we have got to remember, and we've got to come, because it's so easy to put it out of our minds, is that the last transition of power, that is, last time, January 6th, 2021, was a day of violence, a day of death, a day of basically an attempted coup. And the person who was behind that is now about to become president of the United States. If there's nothing else that is outrageous, the fact that he was never held accountable.
I know.
And this Monday is an anniversary of his lack of accountability, in effect.
It's scary.
Well, it's scary, and it also is a blemish, it is something that will historically, I don't think American democracy will ever be the same because of it.
Oh, of course not. I mean, we know this, but it'll be interesting to see how Vice President Harris just shows up and handles her duty and oversees what should be done, right?
Yes, and I think hopefully it'll be very smooth, and hopefully, but will she say anything about what happened last time?
I doubt it. I hope so, but God, it would be great.
And this isn't the first time that a vice president has had to oversee or certify their electoral loss, right? It's only something we care about because of Donald Trump.
Yes, exactly. But that's a huge thing. That person is about to become president of the United States.
Yeah.
That person was never held accountable.
Of course.
He was never held accountable in part because the Democrats had an opportunity to hold him accountable, and they did not.
Right. I mean, I just can't imagine having to do that. But she'll be professional and incredible. She just will be. But whew, not easy. And then next week is the first week of a Republican Senate. Here we go.
Well, the Senate, here again, back to the Constitution. The Republicans in the Senate have as much responsibility as the Democrats in the Senate for advice and consent with regard to nominations coming from the White House as to who the next president wants to run the government.
Advice and consent. Do you have your pocket Constitution? I love when you have that. Darn it.
I should bring
next
it
time.
every time.
I know.
And what does that mean, advice and consent for the audience at home, exactly?
It means that the confirmation process is not a rubber stamp process. It means that you've got people who Donald Trump has already nominated to these very important positions who are highly questionable. And if the Republicans in the Senate haven't had an ounce of integrity, they would make it very difficult for these people to be confirmed, and they wouldn't be confirmed.
And it's Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That's
you have all of those. That's right. I mean, there are many others who are questionable, but those
big four,
are not just questionable. They are dangerous. They are unqualified. I venture to say that in modern history, there have never been nominees who are so absolutely ill-suited to running the federal government.
And yet, you think they're going to be approved, right?
Well, I think that Donald Trump is regarding the Senate Republicans right now and looking at them. And the question hanging over everybody in government as the Republicans take control is how is Trump going to react? Is he going to hold us accountable? And that's the irony here, because Trump holds people accountable. He remembers when people are not loyal. He rewards loyalty and he punishes disloyalty. The man who is not being held accountable by the system holds everybody else accountable.
Now, so these 4 people coming in, obscenely not prepared for the job. I mean, don't have the experience, don't have the knowledge, don't have the clout.
Tulsi Gabbard, because director of national intelligence, who is basically said and agreed with Putin on everything.
I know.
And is regarded in Russia as a kind of as a wonderful person, because and every Russian newspaper talks about how great she is.
But these are my daydreams these days. Will they be so horrendously incapable that they will screw up, and that will be a glaring error, and then we will learn something, and then we will pivot back, we will oscillate back to reality?
Well, that's my kind of daydream too.
Oh, good,
Heather. And we'll get to that. I think there are good things to keep in mind. But how much damage can they do in the meantime? I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., God forbid we have another pandemic. I mean, or we have something the equivalent of a pandemic. What do we do when he says, no, there won't be any vaccines?
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
I know.
Or when he says to the FDA, you are being defanged. And we have all sorts of...
It was already such an uphill battle, too. I read that in 2024, only 20% of people who could have gotten the vaccine for COVID did.
And then again, it is not just him exercising his authority, it's spewing and spreading distrust with regard to the public. And the same thing with regard to the others who are very, very questionable. Kash Patel, for example, at the FBI. I mean, I'm old enough to remember J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI. I mean, that was a good example or bad example of the FBI out of control. But Kash Patel has said already he's going after the media that are not loyal to Trump. He's going after Trump's other enemies. He's made it very explicit in his books and in his writings and in his interviews that there's no constraint on him in terms of being a Trump loyalist.
So you think he has the potential to be worse than J. Edgar Hoover?
I will stake my reputation on saying that, yes, he will be the worst FBI director in history.
I had a question because, I mean, we're talking about this as if it's a done deal, and perhaps it is, but I have a lot of folks back home who live in red states who have Republican senators who they're the constituents of Republican senators. Is there any chance that people could persuade through, some sort of a mass information or letter campaign? I mean, what can people at home do to try and stop this?
Well, with regard to the nominees, right now, I think there's very, very little that can be done. I mean, if the media do show, for example, there was a lot of stories about Hegseth, Pete Hegseth, for the Department of Defense. I mean, he has a history of alcoholism, of sexual abuse and harassment. He headed 2 veterans groups, and he basically, both of them, I don't know whether he took the money, somebody took the money, because both of them fell apart. He has a history that is so ludicrously awful in terms of his character. How can he be Secretary of Defense? When there was one Republican senator, Joni Ernst, who actually went and said maybe she's not sure she wants to support him because she personally had been sexually harassed and I think raped when she was in the military. She was bullied by the Trump Republicans who threatened to put up somebody against her and primary her in the Republican primaries. And she's backed down, essentially.
Yep.
So what are people going to do between now and the next few weeks when these people are going to one by one go through the Senate? I have no idea.
Things could happen that we don't anticipate. Is that right?
I think the House, in some ways, may be more encouraging than the Senate, because the Democrats have more power in the House. Obviously, Republicans control both chambers, but Mike Johnson is hanging on by a small thread.
And that's very, very rare, right? For those of us who don't follow Congress for the last perhaps several decades. I mean, how many times can you remember that happening?
Well, it happened in 2023.
Uh-huh.
But again, this is a question. The larger question is, can Republicans govern? And so far, we don't know, but they have all three major positions. That is the two houses and the presidency. And some would say they also have the Supreme Court. And if this doesn't work, I mean, we know who to hold responsible.
Elon.
And hopefully, the rest of the country knows who to hold responsible.
But it's important. So Donald Musk is going to be sworn in as
Elon Trump.
Elon Trump. Wait, Donald Trump is going to be sworn in as the 47th president, but I'm holding on to everything where there's infighting on things, where I assumed, Mike Johnson will get in. I doubt people will, I don't know, is it disrespect, go against Trump on this, but they did and vote one. So I find that interesting, and I'm holding on for little, shoots of, I don't want to say hope, but
no. I think it's
tension.
Reasonable for us to look for those places where Trump's leadership and his power are limited,
and his influence.
Is very constrained.
Yeah.
And it's easy to look at this next period and say, oh well, he's going to be ruling and controlling everything. We are sliding into fascism and authoritarianism, and to some extent we are. But it's very important to understand that there are limits, there are constraints. And one constraint, obviously, and ironically, is Elon Musk.
I know. How can they govern? I mean, first of all, we just talked about the people that are in the running or haven't shown that they can govern huge groups of people. So that's a problem. But how can they govern with Musk, right? I mean, tweeting behind them and looming over their shoulder?
We have not had, since the first Gilded Age in the United States, where the age of the robber barons that had exerted extraordinary influence over, President McKinley in the late 19th century, we have not had individuals who have been this wealthy, who have had political power and turned their wealth into political power. Andrew Mellon would be another one that came to mind. But Elon Musk is, in this second Gilded Age we're living in, the exemplar, the epitome of the robber baron who has turned his extraordinary wealth, the wealthiest person in the world, into political power and brags about it. It's not that he's trying to hide it. He is enjoying it. He is making his political power evident in all kinds of ways.
It's in neon lights. There's no subtlety.
And he's basically become a guest at Mar-a-Lago, a permanent guest at Mar-a-Lago.
Plus his kiddo, plus the
toddler. And just the sheer speed that he's able to communicate and put pressure on Republicans. At least William Randolph Hearst, he had a couple hours to print a newspaper, right? But Elon just has to sit on his couch and send a tweet.
Elon has, again, his sources of his power are not only the $270 billion he put into the Trump campaign and Trump's willingness to listen to him in Mar-a-Lago, but also his 205 or 210 million followers on his own platform, X. And on top of that, his ability to know what everybody is doing because his satellites can keep track of everyone. We don't even talk about that dimension of his power, but it's a very important dimension. We have never, and yet he is unaccountable. Nobody has ever elected him. This is the most extraordinary exemplar of unaccountable power we have in America today.
And it gets worse. Michael, you were talking earlier about his homies, his far-right homies around the world. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that network that he has is global, right? On Twitter /X, he's, put pressure on politicians in the UK, in terms of immigration, and he's urged his followers to support Nigel Farage, who runs Reform UK, which is one of the far-right parties in the UK, saying he might donate upwards of $127 million. In Germany, he wrote an op-ed in favor of the AfD, Alternative for Germany, a far-right party that has many a neo-Nazi scandal.
That is a neo-Nazi party, is it not?
It is effectively. And I think that, the list goes on, right? You could talk about Italy, you could talk about Canada. He is doing a full broadside in a lot of little ways and growing ways against liberal democracies.
And he's using his X platform and his apparent closeness to Trump, both as ways of affecting foreign policy.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you have a powerful American sitting beside, the United States president, but he is essentially making many moves in terms of foreign policy toward the extreme right.
Yeah, I have a couple other things on my muskrat list.
Your muskrat list,
as you called him on Substack, which I loved. One is this horrible thing that happened in Vegas, where someone blew up a Cybertruck, killed himself and injured others in front of a Trump hotel. But what was so interesting is the head of the Las Vegas Police Department came out and said, we have to thank Elon Musk, who has been so incredibly helpful and got us all the data from all the charging stations and all the Teslas and all the things. And so with his ability to survey, we have gotten data immediately about so much.
I want to know if people who have Teslas know that when they use a charging station, that Elon Musk has data about where they are and where they're moving to.
Oh, yeah, there are cameras in the car that I think you have the option to turn it off, but you can have 24-hour, the camera will just be looking at you, singing your tunes, shouting to your kid in the backseat about the Cheerios going everywhere, all of it.
Because add that to the satellites. He's got 3/4 of all of the global satellites that are actually running the internet internationally, and all the information.
Is that surveillance capitalism?
That's surveillance capitalism with a capital S.
With a capital
and a capital C.
Yeah. So you put out on your Substack this week, it was so interesting to watch this on Twitter come up, where all of a sudden the news of the day during the news hole that was the holidays, where we were all kind of trying to disengage, was Trump talking about, Musk talking about H-1B visas and lots of infighting amongst the MAGA, who's who. But it was interesting to read your Substack where you talked about this, and you've talked about H-1B visas, including when you were Secretary of Labor and on news shows like Dan Rather 100 years ago. Tell us, some people say, what do they say? They say,
well, this is a question of high-skilled immigration, largely in the tech sector, but not limited to. Right,
yes,
Bob?
and Musk has been trying to widen the H-1B visas to get more highly skilled tech workers for years. But the irony is that he has fired many. Every time he slims down, every time he goes through Tesla, for example, he laid off a huge number of Tesla's workers, including many H-1B visas that he applied for. So there's hypocrisy in this as well. One of the problems with H-1B is that a lot of companies, big American companies, high-tech companies, use it as a vehicle for getting cheaper, high-skilled workers than they could have in the United States if they went simply to their, let's say, computer programmers. Computer programmers would cost them more if they were limited to American computer programmers. So they, like Musk, they say, come on over. It's a way of circumventing investments in the American workforce.
Right. And I think in today's world, it's so black or white, and it's so binary, and it's immigration is bad or immigration is good. Now, we have put out many videos of why immigration is good for the economy and for society, but it's interesting to think about who benefits from when Elon pulls in all these H-1B visaed employees before he fires them. Where does that go in the economic system, right?
Bingo. I think that's a critical question to ask. Immigration generally is good, but H-1B visa immigration, where you're bringing in skilled workers from abroad, it's not particularly good. In fact, the only people that are benefiting are the big investors, the CEOs, and Wall Street, because it means more profits. It means less investment in American workers. Why invest in American workers and their training and education if you can get the foreign workers? It means less investment by foreign countries
Right.
and their own workers, because why should they if they're going to simply go
Brain
off
drain.
and it's a
Yep.
continuous brain drain.
Yep.
And it just means that inequality widens.
And this was something that seemed like it was creating cracks in the MAGA coalition over the holiday. This is kind of why we're talking about this. Is that, evidence of more cracks to come, do you think, on this issue between sort of the tech oligarch wing and the MAGA populist wing?
I think there are going to be more and more issues that these two wings, you call them the tech oligarch wing and the MAGA populist wing. I think that's a good way of describing them. They are clashing. Steve Bannon was furious with Elon Musk over this H-1B issue, but it's much more than that. It's really whether class matters. And this is the same thing that Democrats are struggling with. In fact, Democrats really have turned their backs on the working class. I think the MAGA wing is trying to restrain Elon Musk and all of the Silicon Valley people that Musk is bringing into the administration. Keep your eye on this. It's a very important point of contention inside the Trump administration.
By the way, did you all see in the news that Elon had his own burner account? He had his fake Twitter account.
Oh, yes, this is the rumor.
With his the rumor, you're alleged. And so his name was Adrian Dittman. Allegedly,
Dittman?
Yes.
Yes, Dittman.
Yes.
Okay.
Dittman.
And allegedly, he was running this account to counter things that, tweets that would make him look bad. And then Adrian would come in and say, he's a phenomenal father. I don't know what you're talking about. No one is a better in terms of
Now,
paternal
would
influence.
he retweet Adrian's tweet?
Oh, I'm sure. Well, no,
I-
he probably,
Well, they've interacted,
Yes.
supposedly. This is inside baseball for those of us who are trying to stay off of Twitter, as I'm sure many of our audience members are. But yeah, and this is not unlike what Donald Trump allegedly has done in the
Donald
past
Trump
as well.
for years, before he became president in 2016. In fact, I think even after that, he was calling newspapers in a different voice. He tried to
Stop.
disguise his voice to say, Donald Trump is right. Did you get this particular story about him? It's a terrific story. And he would disguise his voice, but a lot of the reporters would eventually catch on that it was Donald Trump promoting himself through ostensibly a third party.
This is influencing the narrative. It seems so much easier to just do a tweet than to actually
I-
have to dial on a rotary phone. The news. Do you know what a rotary phone is?
I do.
Michael?
I do. But it kind of makes me wonder. The theme of power is so important in all of the work that you put out. And these are extraordinarily powerful men. Why are they so insecure?
Well, I think
How far
insecurity.
back in their families are you going to go?
I could go back maybe 2,000 years,
Yeah.
maybe 3,000 years. Insecurity and the lust for power go hand in hand. But what we are seeing now is that wealth, huge amounts of wealth, and power are basically inseparable. And the real definition of power, the one that I think is particularly relevant today, is the ability, unfortunately, to gain even more power and wealth and impose harms on other people while you're doing it, but never be held accountable for doing so. Donald Trump and Elon Musk both are walking examples.
But they're also harnessing the information age. Truth, when it comes, or falsehoods, they move so quickly, and it's across the globe, and it feels like they just have, a saddle on, and they are just riding this wave.
And they are fighting any effort to force truth, to force the platforms, particularly X, to moderate, and this is one of the big issues that separates Europe from the United States right now, because
Right.
the Europeans say, no, you can't just put anything on the internet. It's the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater. We in Europe, we have a different standard. If you were going to create riots because you're filling the internet with lies that are dangerous lies, we're going to stop you. But Musk and the purists, quote unquote, the First Amendment period. They like to use the First Amendment. It's not First Amendment. I mean, if it were First Amendment, we'd have a much more even playing field. No, they like to use their money and their platforms and their access and say, no, we can put anything we want on the internet.
Which is especially ironic given that Musk is using his administrator powers to ban people he doesn't like from X, and even in this argument over H-1B, so allegedly demonetizing right-wing influencers for disagreeing with him, which is,
Well, again, the whole thing is so fundamentally hypocritical. I mean, look what happened in the fight over the bipartisan continuing resolution. Musk came out against it. He said he blew it up. He essentially blew it up. And so there was, the United States government also almost ran out of money. At the last minute, there was a continuing resolution. But what was Musk's interest? Well, it turns out that in the bipartisan continuing resolution was a restriction on what Musk and other big high-tech entrepreneurs could have done with regard to investments in China. Musk wanted to maintain his investments in terms of SpaceX and Tesla in China. And so he blew up that particular continuing resolution.
He was able to do that. I mean, he had that much power and that much self-interest together to make it happen.
And that provision, sorry, just for our audience,
Please.
that was with a particular focus on technologies including AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing.
And
favorites.
He wants those technologies. He wants to be able to sell the Chinese those technologies, to work with the Chinese on those technologies. Now, put aside the question of whether that's appropriate or not. But the official policy of the United States is no, we don't want China to get access to those technologies. But what is Musk doing? He is using his power, his influence, his platform, his money, and his closeness to Trump to basically blow up any congressional approach that might cost him some money.
Okay, Michael and Bob, can we please
Yes.
think about something a little more upbeat? I mean, we don't
No,
have
I want to express to you a kind of outrage and fury.
You're doing it beautifully.
Well, but
I'm
it
feeling
is outrageous. I mean,
I
why
know.
aren't we? I mean, to have this person, Musk, Trump is bad enough. To have Musk, who was not even elected, having this much power is an utter outrage.
And I know everyone's hoping that they'll break up.
Well,
you know.
I think that they won't. They both get something from the other.
And still too much to have. There hasn't been a big enough rift.
No,
to justify
it may
missing
happen.
out.
Some people say to me, "Oh, there's no way that Trump is going to tolerate another big ego next to him." But remember, this other big ego is the richest person in the world. This other big ego has a platform that is gigantic and has 205 million followers. This other big ego is supportive of Trump and put $250 million into the Trump campaign. So it's not exactly
I know.
as if Trump can just.
I think it works for Trump too that Elon's kind of, dorky and he's got his kid on his shoulders. He's not like a sleek guy who he's actually worried about. It feels like he could control him.
He doesn't feel threatened.
I think in some regards he doesn't. And I think he wants his money. So I think he's kind of enamored of him at the same time that he doesn't feel threatened with him sitting next to him.
And I think the other point is that Trump is actually sitting pretty right now. He's not facing any consequences. He's not facing jail. He's not facing a trial. Everything has evaporated. He's making money once again off his pretending. He hasn't even become president yet. He's already making money off his presidency. Everybody in the world is coming, bowing to him and kissing his ring. CEOs all over America are coming and saying to him, can we possibly support your inauguration with another $1 million from our company? I mean, this is what's happening, and Trump is getting everything he wants. Everything he wants.
But back to, so one thing I think that you do on the Coffee Klatch and we look to you for, and in your Substacks, is you remind us of the long game, of the big picture. So I just want a little silver lining. So you wrote in a Substack that there are some constraints out there around Trump and then, his shadow, Elon Musk.
The big constraints I'm looking at are, number one, we've talked about. The Democrats in the House have more power than they've had in the minority
Right.
in living memory.
It's so close. And
and-
this is a reminder that elections matter. Hello, midterms.
Yes, and those down ballot elections really did help the Democrats, and I think that they're looking at 2026 as a way of coming back, frankly, both in the House and the Senate. The second thing I want to point out is that Trump cares mostly about the stock market, so when people say to me, "Oh, but his tariffs are going to wreck the economy," he will not allow that to happen. I don't think he's actually serious about the tariffs, or that his efforts to eliminate or deport 11 to 20 million people here who don't have their papers is going to wreck the economy. I don't think he's going to do that if it starts affecting the stock market. And that's a second reason for not rejoicing, but at least understanding that there is a limit, a constraint on him. The third that I keep going back to is historically. I've mentioned already the Gilded Age and the robber barons of the first Gilded Age, starting in 1885, 1890, extending through 1920. That Gilded Age ended, and it ended with a huge backlash, a reform period. Teddy Roosevelt, antitrust, Food and Drug Administration, new taxes on the wealthy, progressive income taxes, estate taxes, and then with Franklin D. Roosevelt, Teddy's fifth cousin, we had huge amounts of social, really, really path-breaking, important social regulation. I mean, everything from Social Security to unemployment insurance to a 40-hour work week. Well, that was all backlash against the first Gilded Age. And we are now in a second Gilded Age. There will be a backlash because these people are going to overreach. We haven't even started the Trump administration. They're already overreaching.
Yep.
So,
And your fourth one that I think, if I may add to your list,
yes, please
is
do.
from the federal courts, because I liked that Substack you did.
The federal courts are people, when they talk about the courts, they're only thinking about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually takes fewer than 1% of the cases that are given up to it, that are appealed to the Supreme Court. The real power is in the federal district courts and the courts of appeals. And most of those federal district courts are under the control of people who are appointed by Democrats. Judges, I'm not suggesting that judges are political necessarily. Their values may be influenced by whether Democrats or Republicans appointed them. But remember, most of those district court judges have been appointed by Democrats, and half of the appellate judges have been appointed by Democrats. So that's going to be a big constraint, because you can imagine so much of what Trump wants to do and is planning to do, and the people around him are planning to do, the crazies around him are planning to do, that's going to be appealed to the federal court system. That's where the action is going to be. 4 big reasons not to breathe a sigh of relief, but to at least not panic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm taking a deep breath. But I mean, I have to ask, as somebody who has lived through fewer presidential administrations.
When was your first president? When were you born?
Well, my first president, I guess, when I was born, it'd be Bill Clinton, but I don't really remember anything about Bill Clinton.
Of course you don't.
That was the first president. Oh my God.
I know. No, I remember the first president I can remember is George Bush, and that's only because somebody put a little George Bush pin on their kid and sent him to school on the playground back in 2004. But
Gen Z, you're like my students. They don't remember a damn thing.
Not at all.
You can historically.
But I ask, is this really the framing that this is not normal framing for how we talk about presidents, right? Constraints and hopes and prayers that the judiciary and all of these other elements of government will stop their worst instincts necessarily. I mean, even if that's, big picture, maybe the structure of the Constitution, you could argue that. But this is something else. You've worked for other presidents. You didn't hear people talking about Jimmy Carter like this.
No, I worked for Jimmy Carter.
Right.
And may he rest in peace. He was a better president than I think most people gave him credit for at the time. And his character and his temperament are in such sharp contrast to the character and temperament of the person who is about to take over the White House. Jimmy Carter was a deeply, decent man. And he, I mean, I didn't know him very well. I mean, I did work for him, and that meant that I was in meetings where he was there. But he was, and he did have an instinct for the capillary. I mean, he was not tending to look at the large picture all the time. He was an engineer, but he was a good person. He was a good person. And a president is not just a manager. A president is a moral exemplar for the nation, which is one of the reasons why Trump is such a tragedy.
And he genuinely saw himself that way. You told me a story of him that he was president when I was born in Atlanta. I was born in Atlanta, but
So you don't remember?
I don't remember. No, I remember
Carter administration.
No, but I remember Ronald Reagan, big time. That's who I remember.
Gen Z, Gen X?
No, yes, Gen X. I thought you were going to call me a millennial again, and I couldn't take it.
Gen X and Gen Z.
Yeah.
You guys are so young.
Oh, tell us again.
You
We'd
are
love to
so
hear about this.
young.
Michael,
Yes.
you probably don't like it as much
Yes.
as I do. But I just thinking about how the day he didn't drive up to the White House, right? What did he do? You told me that the other
No,
day.
he after he was inaugurated, after he gave his inauguration speech, usually presidents are escorted, with Secret Service and drive up to the White House. No, he got out of his car and he put his jacket over his shoulder and he walked. He sent his child, Amy, to a public school, which again was at that time. I mean, presidents don't do that in Washington.
Only 3 ever have.
And only 3 have done
Yeah.
it. But that was historically really quite an event. He allowed people into the White House. I mean, he was the most populist in the best sense of the term populist
Yep.
president we've had in a very long time.
Right.
He wasn't perfect. I mean,
No, of course not.
I mean, but he was kicked out of office primarily because of Paul Volcker. Do you remember Paul Volcker?
Remember of Paul Volcker.
Paul
Remember you
Volcker.
telling me about Paul
Yeah,
Volcker.
exactly.
Paul Volcker was the head of the Federal
Fed
Reserve
chair,
Board,
yeah.
and inflation was double digit. It was double digit inflation because of the OPEC oil embargo. That had driven prices way up. Carter couldn't do anything about that. And Paul Volcker said, well, I'm going to break the back of inflation. And he put interest rates up so high that he did break the back of inflation. He also plunged the United States into a deep recession, and he broke the presidency of Jimmy Carter. I mean, it's the same thing that Alan Greenspan essentially did to George H.W. Bush. When the Federal Reserve had raised its interest rates so high that the economy has plunged into recession, the incumbent president doesn't have a chance if
Yep.
the incumbent president happens to be running for re-election.
It's the economy, stupid.
It is the economy. And this is what happened in a way to Joe Biden.
Yeah. So, I mean, you keep saying how young Michael and I are, and I appreciate that so much. Did you know that, so as of January 1, right, a couple days ago, the newest generation has started. So anyone born is called Generation Beta, Gen Beta for the next
The
14
alphas are over.
Wait a minute,
alphas are
I want to
done.
know who makes these decisions. I mean, Elon Musk? Is it?
No,
is
I'm
Elon?
sure some social scientist
Mhm.
carefully looking at the Greek alphabet.
Demographers and some such.
Yeah, wondering what should I do after
How
alpha?
long is a generation?
I think they're trying to standardize them as around 14 or 15 years now,
Yep.
roughly.
Yeah. My 12-year-old son is Gen Alpha. And now here comes Gen Beta. I mean, I think we should really, come on, Gen Beta. We're going to need you.
I mean, there are not that many left, right?
Of Gen Beta? There are
Well,
not that many
No,
yet.
I mean, how many Greek letters do we have?
Oh,
I mean-
are there 20, 26?
I don't know.
26?
Yeah, but this is going to be a whole generation, and to some extent, part of Gen Alpha as well, that's only known politics as defined by Donald Trump, right? Which is very
Oof,
unusual.
I know.
It's, well, again, in terms of the moral effect that a president has on a generation or more, it is quite apart from all the awful things he's going to try to do, it is already a blight, a severe blight on America. And on that upbeat note,
Whew.
I think I want to thank both of you, Gen X and Gen Z, and from the boomers corner. Let me just say thank you all for joining us. This is not going to be an easy time. You know it, and we know it. It's going to be a frightening time we're sliding into, but I hope we've given you a cause for a little bit more comfort that you may be feeling. We'll see you next Saturday.